give you proper time to prepare. So, we're here today to learn a little bit about and hear some of the music of Stephen Collins Foster. Born the 4th of July in 1826 in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania, which is now part of modern Pittsburgh. He had 9 older siblings and 1 younger brother that did not survive, so he became the baby of the family. He was from a middle-class family, so you might anticipate that in early 19th century middle-class family, he didn't have access to that thorough of an education, but actually he had many private tutors, attended private universities, and while he did not have a taste for rote memorization and practicing of math facts and things like that, he was an avid reader and a very literate person and enjoyed reading to the end of his days. He taught himself clarinet, guitar, flute, and piano. He did not teach himself pump organ, but we're going to hear that for a couple of the songs today. As a young man, he went with his brother William. William was apprenticed as an engineer in Towanda, Pennsylvania. And it was in Towanda where Stephen met Henry Fleber, a German-born music dealer who worked with Foster on his music composition skills. So they studied Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart, and other music they would have had access to that was already well-renowned and well-regarded. In modern days, we would think a little bit of also studying musicians from the Romantic era, but they were living in the Romantic era. That was just modern music to them. From there, at age 20, Stephen went on to work as a bookkeeper for his brother Dunning, a steamship firm in Cincinnati. And as far as I can tell, Dunning is the brother's first name. While in Cincinnati, he sold his first hit single, if you will, "Oh Susanna."
You can just ask him.
He said the keyboard's a little too loud?
Yes.
We don't hear you.
You want me to sing louder? I can be louder.
We can hear you over the piano.
You can? Okay.
And we would like to.
Okay. So, "Oh Susanna" went on to become a national hit. It was sung across the entire United States. Although the song was widely published and well known, it was mostly pirated. Over 24 publishers published it without Foster's permission after it became a well-known hit by the Christie Minstrels. Foster received compensation from only one of those publishers, $100 from the Cincinnati publisher W.C. Peters. So Go Cincinnati. We're the only ones that have paid for his work so far. Oh Susanna was a financial failure, but Foster learned two very important lessons from that. One, his songs were good. They had the potential to generate a lot of income. And two, he would need to fight to protect his artistic property. By 1850, with 12 songs published under his belt, he returned to Pittsburgh sometime in late 1849, early 1850. A recurring theme in Stephen Foster's life is that there's not nearly as much of a biographical trail as we'd like there to be, so there are a lot of estimated dates. He got married to Jane Denny McDowell in 1850, and they had a daughter Marion in 1851. And it was with this move back to Pittsburgh where he determined that he was going to earn his living as America's first professional full-time songwriter. During this period of his life, he wrote some of his best-known songs: Camptown Races, Ring the Banjo, Old Dog Tray, Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair, and Nellie Bly.
Make the fire burn, and while I take the banjo
So I want to highlight some differences between the world Stephen Foster was living in at this point and the one we live in now. The world of music publication was in its infancy. Stephen Foster's contracts with music publishers are the oldest music contracts we know of between American songwriters and American publishers. And he was a shrewd businessman. His contracts were handwritten by himself. I wasn't able to determine if that meant he was the original one to draft him or that if he just made sure he had everything in his own handwriting for his own records. Music sales were not easy to track in that time, and there weren't any lawyers that specialized in protecting the rights of authors. So he could earn a 5 to 10% commission off of the sales of his works, of only his own edition that he first gave to the publisher and not any future editions, or he could outright sell his songs to the publisher. In this part of his life, he tended more towards that commission option, but later on we're going to see a different story. Eventually, this would prove too difficult to continue for a long period of time, but during this middle part of his professional life, he made it work. He was a professional songwriter for several years. There's also several misconceptions about Stephen Foster that we should take a moment to correct. One was kind of how his legacy has survived to this day. He has several lyrics that we would absolutely cringe at today, but in his time, he spoke with his peers about trying to reform minstrel music. The people of color represented in them, he wanted to depict them not as punchlines with no human feelings the way a lot of his contemporaries did. He tried to bring more life and personality and emotion into them. I'll talk a little more about that later. There's also a myth of Stephen Foster as a naturally talented composer, kind of a Mozart-like figure who drafts everything out on the first try with no hard work and sends it off to the publisher. With the record of Foster's sketchbooks, we know this is exactly not the case. He would draft and redraft his song for months, sometimes agonizing over whether to place and remove one comma before he would finally send it off to the publisher sometime after that. He has notebooks full of different drafts of his songs, so we know he wasn't just a natural that did everything on the first try. Despite his desire to reform minstrel music and present more human stories for those characters, we don't have any evidence that would suggest Foster was an abolitionist. I imagine there's people arguing this point contentiously to this day, but to my knowledge, that evidence does not exist. On this middle period of his life we are in right now, many of his songs focused on a sense of longing for home and family. And this includes what would go on, at least for some time, to become his best known song, Old Folks at Home, also known as Swanee River. I think this is the number of papers I want to take this with me. Bear with me, I don't walk as quickly and easily as I talk. time was hard to give that a try.
Is there any evidence you ever saw the Suwannee River?
So we know during his honeymoon to the deep south that he went as far as New Orleans. I looked up where the Suwannee River was and I can't remember. I know Florida's really fond of that song, so I thought maybe that meant it's way over there. Yes.
The rest of the small Georgia down across the Panhandle that ends out in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
My grandparents are from the border on the Suwannee River.
Then it seems like he may have actually made it down there. In 1852, 2 years after their marriage, Stephen and Jane went on a belated honeymoon on a riverboat cruise to the deep south. Hope you guys get into it. Despite the prevalent themes of the beautiful South in his music, he only went south of the Ohio River once in his life during this honeymoon. In 1853, Foster would try to pivot away from the minstrel music for which he had become so well known to writing instrumental music publications, especially parlor music. So what you might think of as playing a piano in a small group in a room with friends. The music of Chopin's especially suited to this kind of thing. So a far cry from the boisterous Americana songs he was writing before this. Also worth noting, his works are not nostalgic for an antebellum South looking back after the Civil War as a lot of other folks would write about it. For him, this was just the present. And that is why this stand is so wide. Sunshine exercise for a week.
Hard to sing and pump at the same time, isn't it?
I have never done anything more challenging in my musical life. And I play the pipe organ with 2 hands and 2 feet every Sunday, so. There it is. The end of Stephen Foster's life was more difficult and less prosperous than anything that had come before. Sometime in late 1853 or early 1854, he and his wife Jane were separated for some time. Wasn't able to find anything that talked about how long that was. Foster's close friend and co-writer Charles Shearis died this time, and then the next year in 1855, both of Stephen Foster's parents died. So just tragedy after tragedy piled down on him. His song output slowed down from this point on, where he was writing dozens of songs per year. In this year, he only wrote 4. He was forced to take advances from his publishers, and then he was unable to write enough to meet those debts. So in 1860, he turned back to writing minstrel music, perhaps hoping to regain the easier profits he was once seeing, and he moved his family to New York. They would not stay as an entire family for long. The very next year, in 1861, Jane left and took Marion with her, and Foster spent the remaining years of his life alone in New York, just in whatever small apartments and hotel rooms he could find. And in the uncertain wartime economy, because remember, this is 1860, he could no longer get a publishing contract. Publishers weren't offering contracts anymore. No one knew what to expect of the times, and no one would make that long-term of a deal. So if he wanted to be paid at all for his compositions, he was forced to sell them outright, which is what he did during this time of his life. During his final years in New York, Foster wrote almost 100 songs. Very few of them are still known today, whether that's a testament to lost records or a reduced quality, I'm not sure. But one from this time period, written in 1862 and published in 1864, a few months after his death, would go on to have enduring popularity, and that is Beautiful Dreamer.
Beautiful dreamer, wake up to me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. Sounds of the moon world heard in the day, lulled by the moonlight have all passed away. Beautiful dreamer, of my song, lest when I move thee with soft melody, gone are the cares of life's busy throng. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, out on the sea, mermaids are chanting the wild Lauren over the streamlet, vapors are born, waiting to fade at the bright coming morn.
You got that note.
So, if Foster's early life suffered from a lack of good biographical documentation, the ending of his life suffered even worse from the same problem. What records do exist were combed through by one of his older brothers seeking to preserve the family honor. And since by this point he was a widely published, renowned author, they destroyed any evidence that would make the family look bad. So what we did have is even smaller than what we could have. Foster became sick with a fever in January of 1864. He was found bleeding out in his hotel room. It's unclear whether he fell in his sickness and cut his head on the bathtub, or whether he was perhaps trying to take his own life. Historians argue about that to this day. He was taken to Bellevue Hospital, where 3 days later he would die. America's great songwriter, whose music continues to interest and inspire us over 150 years later, died at only 37 years old with less than $1 to his name. So what legacy does Foster leave behind? Well, he created the first collection of distinctly American sounding music. And notably not a fancy scholarly American music. These were songs that common people knew and loved to sing along to. As radio and television became popular in the decades after his death, his songs were frequently used, both for their catchy melody and for the expired copyright. My Old Kentucky Home was adopted as the official state song of Kentucky in 1928. But his legacy would be mixed in some ways too. A 1900 statue of Foster located in Schenley Plaza in Pittsburgh between 1940 and 2018 was removed for its long-standing reputation as the most controversial public art in Pittsburgh, for its depiction of an African-American banjo player at the feet of the seated composer. Critics say the statue glorifies white appropriation of black culture and depicts the vacantly smiling musician in a way that is at best condescending and at worst racist. Foster also left behind a mixed bag in terms of cultural sensitivity. Many of his lyrics are outright offensive today. If you care to research it yourself, you'll note that I only sang 2 verses of O Susanna at the beginning of this program. Have a glance at the missing 2 verses and you'll see immediately what I mean. But other songs, especially from later in his career, such as Old Folks at Home and Old Black Joe, were acknowledged by W.E.B. Du Bois as being different, fundamentally, from the debasing minstrel songs that were popular in their era. Perhaps Foster's most enduring legacy is songs that we can still recognize and sing along to 150 years later. And if saying his best legacy was a bunch of songs and then playing a song isn't enough of a definite ending for you, that's